My eyes are hot and tearful. I'm trembling, as my gasps for air grow increasingly difficult. I'm trapped. I can't move. The words, "I'm a failure," repeat in my mind incessantly as I stare at my bank account's negative balance. I've experienced panic attacks countless times over the years. The cause is most often money. Financial stress is an underrecognized cause of mental health challenges. For many marginalized communities, my own included, financial instability is a mental health crisis. Data from the American Psychological Association shows that people often cite money as a top contributor to their overall stress and that anxiety about money is most likely to occur among people with lower incomes. Yet talking about money remains taboo, and discussions of mental health and self-care rarely include tangible ways to deal with the unique agony of financial struggles or the structural injustices that financial stressors stem from. Experts say financial stress should be viewed as a potential trauma in a person's life, and mental health professionals can play a role in how that trauma is treated. The risk for widespread financial trauma is especially high right now. The COVID-19 pandemic is introducing many people to the experience of financial vulnerability for the first time. Around 20 million Americans are now unemployed, and for others, issues like job insecurity and slashed salaries are exacerbating a pre-existing condition. A growing body of research suggests these kinds of financial stressors can cause lasting mental health damage. A 2019 study of young adult unemployment found that for each year without a job, the odds of having depression increased by 33% and the odds of generalized anxiety disorder increased by 19%. Quinn G., a licensed professional counselor at Magnolia Mental Health in Washington, D.C., primarily serves Black LGBTQ folks in their 20s and 30s. G says that many of her clients work in the informal economy, jobs and activities that are not regulated, leaving workers unprotected, with some engaging in survival sex work. They have lost their jobs, G says. COVID has really impacted their ability to provide for themselves. A lot of them are in limbo, waiting on unemployment or stimulus checks. This is something they've had to add as a stressor on top of the hardship they were already dealing with. Jason Nicholson, a licensed clinical social worker who works with the Center for Financial Social Work located in North Carolina, says more people are coming in with symptoms of financial anxiety. They'll say, "I notice I'm clenching my jaw," or "I feel so depressed I can't get out of bed," says Nicholson. They describe feeling guilt, "I'm not as productive as I could be. I'm not making enough money for my family." Experiencing financial instability can snowball into financial trauma, which G defines as a set of experiences related to money, or a lack of money, that cause harm. This includes people who are in financially abusive relationships and people in other circumstances where they cannot make decisions about money, like those who are unemployed and youth who are financially dependent on their guardians. And yet, so often financial stressors are not viewed as mental health issues. As COVID-19 continues to devastate communities, the same solution that's always given when people are in dire economic straits is raised once again: better financial education and literacy. But the call for greater financial literacy so often blames those experiencing acute economic crises for a situation caused by capitalism and greed that a few tips won't solve. Financial education becomes synonymous with budgeting, building savings, and other so-called must-dos that aren't accessible to many people. The mental health toll of an economic system driven by profit, where necessities get more expensive and further out of reach while wages stagnate, is completely left out. As both G and Nicholson share, financial trauma is real, and shame is a huge source of distress for those experiencing it. What is needed is more recognition and research on the connections between financial instability and mental health. Financial education should focus on equipping people with the tools needed to do more than cope under a broken system. No one sat me down to explain how systems of oppression impacted my access to and use of monetary resources. No one prepared me for the pay discrimination I could face as a queer Black person. My own therapist first introduced me to the idea of money as a source of trauma after it became a recurring theme in our sessions. For as long as I can remember, money was a strain. Growing up, a debt was always owed, and a bill was always due. My family of 5 seldom had sufficient funds to provide for our needs, and I'd continue to experience this scarcity throughout my youth and young adulthood. While money impacted my daily life, it wasn't something my parents ever discussed with me, besides the frequent, "we can't afford that" or "mind your business" when I asked questions. Very few of us, if any, are talking to our kids about money, says Nicholson. We don't teach our kids what student loans are, or what a credit card is, or how to use them effectively. Certainly no parent or classroom prepared me to manage the burden of student loan debt. Along with my degrees, I graduated from college with thousands of dollars to pay off, including the emergency loan I took out from my university to cover my final semester's remaining balance. And yet after graduation, job description after job description required a master's degree for human rights and public policy work. Without connections to help me maneuver past the gate of superfluous eligibility requirements, the best route seemed to be another degree. So I decided to enter a master's program in international development. I created a spreadsheet to plan out the costs of my education. A tuition of $40,000 a semester in the United States versus a tuition of $5,000 a year abroad made the decision for me, and I left the country to attend school for 2 years. But while traveling abroad for school felt like the financially prudent choice, I was isolated. I missed my black queer community and was missing out on the last years of my father's life. The living and relocation expenses still quadrupled my debt, but it was better than sextupling it, I told myself. I graduated with a master's degree in development studies, 6 figures in debt, and a slew of prestigious unpaid internships on my resume. I also graduated with trauma and heartbreak. Throughout those years of schooling, no one sat me down to explain how systems of oppression impacted my access to and use of monetary resources. No one prepared me for the pay discrimination I could face as a queer black person. Many newly unemployed Americans may be in a similar situation. Money is a reflection of how we grew up, how our families talked about it, and very often it's deemed a taboo subject in general, says Nicholson. People will open up, in therapy, about really traumatic experiences and challenges with substance use way before they talk about how much debt they have or that they're struggling to pay the rent. Therapists can help people learn how to treat financial trauma as they would other stressors. Mental health providers taught me grounding techniques and breathing exercises, tools I now use when I become trapped in worry about money. Many of the techniques I use, such as grounding, are associated with eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, a psychotherapy treatment designed to alleviate the distress associated with trauma. When I use a grounding technique, I focus on the sensation of my feet pressed on the floor. I name 5 sounds, 5 scents, and 5 colors that I see around me. As I start to worry about money, I imagine a loved one holding me tight, remember how the warmth of their skin feels, and hear the sound of their voice. G's approach to treating financial stress is informed, in part, by the work of Robert Carter, Ph.D., a licensed psychologist and professor of psychology and education at Teachers College, Columbia University. Carter's race-based trauma model draws attention to racism as a stressor that harms individuals. G employs what's called cognitive restructuring in her practice as a way to detach guilt and shame from privilege or a lack of privilege and financial stress. Cognitive restructuring is the process in cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT) of identifying and changing negative thoughts. For instance, some of G's clients successfully fundraised to meet their financial needs and now feel guilt for their access to resources. G explains, I teach clients who are traditionally marginalized, BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and disabled persons, and did not have access to privilege, financial, housing, ability, or otherwise, prior to COVID or the protests to accept the privileges they are receiving because it is not privilege, but basic human rights. G says she works with her clients to assign the negative feelings they have about having privilege to the appropriate systems or persons and not themselves. Today, I am more financially stable than I have ever been, but the trauma of over 20 years of financial instability still shows up. It underlies the obsessive checking of my bank account and budget. It shows up in a persistent fear that I will lose my job and become insecure once again. It causes my panic attacks. What is shifting is my sense of despair. Going to therapy equipped me with a range of tools for coping with the stress of financial trauma and the associated shame. Understanding that my experiences with money are tied to a flawed economic system, as opposed to a personal failing, was life-changing.